Okay, so mounting specimens on specimen blocks from cast molds. So we have specimen block here. It's just oak. It's coated with wax. Here we've got a specimen that was cast yesterday. You can see the label on the bottom, and I'm going to go ahead and transcribe that label onto another piece of paper so that I can label the blocks. Now, there are, it looks like 1, 2, 3 separate specimens in here, so I'm going to make a label, 3 labels for each, 3 labels, 1 each, and I'm going to go ahead and get a couple different blocks out. Leave a little bit of room in between each one. Alright. And then simple enough to just tear these into individual labels. 1 for each block. That's that. So, let's turn each block on its side. What we're going to do is just set up each label on the side of the block to have some way of identifying the specimens once they're mounted on these blocks. And onto each, I'm going to lay a chunk of paraffin. It comes chipped, but there's usually 1 or 2 sort of clumps that are stuck together that you can grab that are easy to use for this. Just set them on top of the paper label. Doesn't need to be perfect. Now, go ahead and heat the spatula here. Get it good and hot. And I'm going to just set it on top of this paraffin and melt it down over the label. Again, this facilitates being able to prepare multiple specimens at one time and keep a record of what's what once it's mounted on the block. For some researchers' purposes, this won't really be necessary, but for the purposes of my own research, it is absolutely necessary. Be able to maintain the specimen ID all the way to the microscope slide. Now, these are ready to go. I'm going to flip them up on their sides now and clear space. Alright, so here are my specimens embedded in wax. I'm just going to press in on the sides of this petri dish, roll it around on my fingers, press in on the sides of it until it comes free. press on the bottom after a point to loosen that up. Sometimes it works well when it's sitting on the table, and then you don't have to tap it. All you have to do is press. And pop it out. Now, there are 3 specimens in here. I'm going to go ahead and cut them apart and just start cutting them out of this. The heated razor blade, nice and easy. Cut a generous swath around these. Always leave yourself some room for trimming. You're going to need to trim these eventually parallel with microtome blade, and so it's very important not to cut too much off in the initial steps here. I'm going to cut each block separate from each other. So there's one specimen in a square paraffin. Here's another specimen. And then our final one comes right here. Double check and make sure I haven't missed somebody in there. Leave that aside. Now, I have 3 specimens and 3 specimen blocks. I want to go ahead and trim a little bit more wax off these specimens. I'm going to hold my finger right on top of the specimen. I'm going to leave a little bit of space, a couple of millimeters, 3 or 4, on the other side of my fingertip. Just take the edge off this block. I can try and trim it up, make it a little more square, which is important when it comes to microtoming. Let me go ahead and process all these here. Again, put my finger on the specimen, leave a couple millimeters space, trim the excess off, 3 or 4 millimeters worth of room. Just take the edge off these blocks so I don't have too much paraffin on there. Makes 2, and then our last one here. Leave just enough room there to go ahead and be able to trim those later. I'm going to hang on to these little pieces of paraffin that have come off because, as we'll see, we'll use those in a minute. Okay, so let's see if I can't get you in a little bit closer here. Alright, so move this here where you can see it. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and take a specimen, I'll recover its orientation, and I'm going to set the forceps right around it right there so that I can pick it up quickly when the time comes. And then this, I'm going to go ahead and melt this wax down with this hot spatula. I want to make this a nice liquid bed of paraffin to set the specimen block on. The paraffin will bond well to itself if the specimen and the block are both liquid at the time of the bonding. Grab the specimen, and here's what we do. Take that surface and then just slide this across the knife, and then you have about a second or two readjust the specimen's orientation on the block. It should be perpendicular to the face of the block, so when it goes in the microtome it sits nicely. And I'm going to go ahead and smooth this out over here. The specimen blocks as they're cast have a rather low profile in this case. Specimens are quite small. So I want to make sure that there's plenty of clearance around the block, around the specimen there, especially on the edges, where I'm going to need to trim it again once it's mounted on the microtome. I'm going to go ahead and inspect it and make sure there's a good layer of paraffin all the way around it. So now, specimen labeled, mounted onto paraffin, ready to go in the microtome.